She just lost. And somehow, that loss is about to change everything. 3 days ago, Eala walked off a court in Cincinnati with her head down. She had a set in hand. She had the momentum, and then it slipped away, piece by piece, until the scoreboard read a result nobody in the Philippines wanted to see. But here is the part that makes no sense. Right now, as you watch this, Eala is not packing her bags and going home. She is getting ready to step onto Arthur Ashe Stadium. And she is not walking in alone. The man beside her is ranked number 4 in the entire world. His name is Felix Auger-Aliassime. And a few days ago he called her. Not to console her. Not to check in after a rough loss. He called with an offer that turned her worst week of the season into one of the biggest opportunities of her career. So, how does that work? How does a player who just got eliminated end up days later, standing next to a top 5 men's player about to play under the brightest lights in American tennis? That is the question we are answering today. Because on the surface, this looks like a simple story. A wild card, a doubles pairing, nothing that should matter outside of one tournament. But when you actually look at what is happening here, at why Felix Auger-Aliassime specifically wanted her, at what he said about her fan base, about something he called the Eala effect, you start to realize this is not really about doubles tennis at all. This is about a 21-year-old from the Philippines who has quietly become one of the most valuable names in the entire sport, and most casual fans have no idea it happened, so stick with me. Because to understand why one of the best players on the planet wanted Eala specifically, standing next to him at the US Open, we need to go back. Back to a country with almost no tennis history. Back to a girl nobody expected to make it this far. Not long ago, most American sports fans had never heard the name Eala. That is not an insult. That is just geography. The Philippines has never produced a major tennis star. Basketball owns the country, boxing owns the country, tennis was always a sport other nations played. So when a young girl from Manila started hitting balls at a local court, nobody was thinking Grand Slam. Nobody was thinking Arthur Ashe Stadium. They were just watching a kid who happened to be fast, focused, and stubborn in a way that made her hard to beat. Her talent eventually took her somewhere far from home. She left the Philippines as a teenager and enrolled at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain. Think about what that actually means. A young girl, thousands of miles from her family, training every single day next to some of the most disciplined athletes in the sport, trying to prove she belonged in a system that was never built with players like her in mind. There was no blueprint, no previous Filipino star she could study and copy. She was the blueprint. And here is where the story gets its emotional weight. Back home, an entire country started paying attention in a way that felt different from typical fandom. Families gathered around phones and laptops just to catch grainy live streams of her matches. Older fans who never followed tennis in their lives suddenly knew her serve motion, her forehand, her records. Because for a lot of Filipinos, watching Eala compete was not just about tennis. It was about seeing someone who looked like them, sounded like them, carried their flag colors, competing against players from countries with decades of tennis infrastructure behind them. That is the weight she has carried since she was a teenager. Not just her own career, a nation's hope that someone from their country could finally break through on the biggest stages in the sport. And she did not just break through once. This year alone, she has played 56 matches. 56. That is more than almost anyone else on the entire WTA Tour. She has won 38 of them. She climbed all the way to a career-high ranking of world number 18. She won her first WTA title in Washington. She reached the round of 16 in Toronto. Every single one of those results matters because none of them were guaranteed. Nobody handed her a ranking. Nobody handed her a title. She earned every point on a body that has had almost no time to rest all year. That is important to understand before we go any further, because what happened next did not come from a place of comfort or stability. It came from a player who was already stretched to her limit, already carrying more matches than almost anyone else in the sport, already carrying the expectations of an entire country on her shoulders. If you are getting invested in this story already, that is exactly the point. This is not a highlight reel about a lucky wild card. This is about a player who has been grinding at a pace that would break most athletes, and somehow kept climbing anyway. But grinding at that pace comes with a cost. And 3 days ago in Cincinnati, that cost finally showed up in the worst possible way. Round of 32. Cincinnati Open. The match that was supposed to be one more step in Eala's rise toward the US Open. She came out sharp, locked in. She took the first set clean, playing the kind of aggressive, flat, punishing tennis that had carried her through 55 matches already this season. For a moment, it looked like business as usual. Another win, another step forward. Then Amanda Anisimova started fighting back. Set 2 turned into a battle. Every point stretched longer. Every rally asked one more question of Eala's legs, her lungs, her focus, and slowly the answers started changing. The player who had been dictating play in set 1 was now the one absorbing pressure. Anisimova leveled the match at 1 set apiece. Here is the question worth sitting with for a second. When you have played 55 professional matches in 8 months, when your body has barely had time to recover between tournaments, what happens in your legs during set 3 of a brutal 3-setter? What happens to your first serve percentage? What happens to your footwork on the 7th deuce of a game that should have ended 3 points earlier? Set 3 answered that question in the cruelest way possible. Anisimova pulled away, 6-2. The match that started with Eala in control ended with her watching her opponent celebrate. Final score: 4-6, 6-4, 6-2. A match Eala led. A match Eala lost. And this was not an isolated bad day. This is the pattern hiding underneath one of the best seasons of her career. 56 matches played. That number sounds impressive until you realize what it actually costs a 21-year-old body. Most top players on tour carve out weeks of rest between big tournaments. Eala has barely had days. Here is another question. If the volume of matches is already this extreme, what happens when a player keeps adding more events on top of an already packed schedule instead of resting before the biggest tournament left on the calendar? Because that is exactly what analysts started warning about. One well-known voice in tennis media, writing for Tennis 365, pointed directly at Eala's schedule and called it a gamble. Not a compliment. A warning. The concern was simple and blunt. Between exhibition matches, mixed doubles commitments, and back-to-back tournaments, Eala was stacking nearly 8 straight weeks of competitive tennis leading into the US Open, with almost no real recovery window before the biggest event of the season. Think about what that means for a player who just lost a 3-set battle where fatigue visibly crept into her legs in the final set. So here is where the story sits. A career-high ranking, a breakout title in Washington, a deep run in Toronto, and now a painful 3-set collapse in Cincinnati that exposed exactly the kind of physical strain critics had been warning about for weeks. The timing could not be worse. The US Open is right around the corner, the biggest stage of her season, and instead of arriving fresh and confident, Eala is walking away from Cincinnati with a loss that raises real questions about whether her body can hold up under this workload. Fans back home went quiet in the way fans do when something feels fragile. Not panicking, just worried. Because if fatigue was already showing up in a hard-court tune-up event, what happens across best-of-3 sets against the best players in the world at a Grand Slam? For a few days, it genuinely looked like Eala's momentum had hit a wall at the worst possible moment. Like the story of her breakout season might end with a whimper instead of a statement. And then her phone rang. Here is what nobody expected. The call did not come from her coach. It did not come from a sponsor trying to soften the blow of a tough loss. It came from a man ranked number 4 in the entire world, Felix Auger-Aliassime. And what he offered was not a pep talk. It was a wild card into the US Open mixed doubles main draw, standing across the net from Grand Slam champions, playing under the lights of Arthur Ashe Stadium, with the mixed doubles action beginning August 25th and the final on August 26th on the biggest court tennis has to offer. Now, here is where most people get this story wrong. On the surface, this looks like a nice consolation prize, a doubles event, not even Eala's main draw, something to fill time before her singles run begins. That assumption is the twist, because Felix Auger-Aliassime did not need a doubles partner. He is a top 5 singles player heading into the final Grand Slam of the year. He could have picked almost anyone, a more experienced doubles specialist, a higher-ranked partner, someone with a track record in this exact format. He picked Eala, on purpose. And when he explained why, on Tennis Channel, he did not talk about her forehand or her return game. He talked about something else entirely. He said this was his chance to finally feel what he called the Eala effect. His words, not ours. He said it almost like he was studying a phenomenon rather than describing a tennis partner. He pointed out that even though she is younger than him, she is the one carrying the crowd. She is the one with the fan base behind her. Sit with that for a second. A 26-year-old, top 5 men's player, essentially admitting that a 21-year-old woman ranked outside the top 15 might bring more crowd energy into that stadium than he does. That is not a compliment about her tennis. That is an admission about her gravity, about the pull she has on an audience regardless of the scoreline. This is the part that reframes everything you thought you understood about this story. This was never really about doubles strategy or filling out a bracket. Felix Auger-Aliassime wanted proximity to something he could not manufacture on his own. A crowd that shows up specifically because of one player's name on the draw sheet. Think back to Cincinnati. Think about that 3-set collapse, that fatigue creeping into her legs in the final set, that warning from tennis media about her exhausting schedule. Now place that next to a top 5 player publicly saying he wants to be near her spotlight. Both things are true at the same time. She is physically stretched to her limit, and she has become valuable enough that one of the best players alive is actively seeking her out, not despite her workload, but seemingly unfazed by it. That is the aha moment here. This story was never simply lose in Cincinnati, then get rescued by a lucky wild card. It is proof that somewhere in the last 18 months, without most casual fans noticing, Eala stopped being just another rising player on tour. She became a draw, a name that changes how other elite athletes plan their own schedules. And if that sounds like a bold claim, wait until you see the proof behind it.